Emily and Alex seemed like the perfect couple, the kind neighbors admired and friends envied, but behind closed doors. A quiet obsession was building, and when Alex suddenly collapsed, Emily refused to believe he was dying, insisting he was just asleep, setting the stage for a chilling tragedy no one could have predicted. Emily was the kind of person everyone assumed they knew at a glance. She lived in a modest suburban neighborhood, in a small house with neatly trimmed hedges and flower boxes that always seemed perfectly arranged. On the outside, her life appeared ordinary, maybe even enviable. She was polite to neighbors, volunteered occasionally at the local community center, and always had a warm smile ready for anyone who passed by. Friends described her as thoughtful and attentive, the kind of person who remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and little personal details that most people would forget. There was something undeniably comforting about her presence, and yet, beneath that carefully constructed image, there were hints of something more intense, something that didn't quite fit with the idea of ordinary. Her boyfriend, Alex, was charismatic in a way that made him instantly likable. He was outgoing, full of energy, and had a laugh that could fill a room. People who met him often said he seemed like the kind of person who could light up even the dullest gathering, and Emily had a way of complementing that energy with calm reassurance. To an outsider, their relationship seemed perfect, a balanced partnership of charm and stability. Emily and Alex would often be seen walking together in the park, holding hands or sharing coffee on weekend mornings. From the outside looking in, it was easy to believe they were genuinely happy, that their relationship was built on trust, love, and mutual respect. But life behind closed doors told a different story, one that was far more complex and, over time, troubling. Emily had a subtle but unrelenting way of controlling the details of Alex's life. At first, it seemed innocent, a suggestion here, a small correction there, but gradually her influence grew. She would meticulously plan his daily routines, track his health, and insist on being involved in decisions that most couples would handle independently. Even small choices, like what he wore or where he ate, were often guided by her insistence that she knew what was best. Friends initially saw these behaviors as signs of care and devotion. They assumed Emily's attentiveness came from love, not realizing how it slowly began to shape Alex's world around her preferences and judgments. Despite the controlling tendencies, there were moments that looked normal, even tender. Alex would smile when Emily prepared meals exactly how he liked them. She would leave little notes reminding him to drink water or rest. She was always nearby, ready to offer advice or reassurance. On the surface, it appeared to be the perfect balance of love and attentiveness. But as time went on, the line between care and obsession began to blur. Emily's attention was constant, suffocating, and increasingly invasive. No one outside the home could see the full extent of the tension, but small cracks began to appear. Alex occasionally seemed withdrawn, distracted, almost hesitant in ways that worried those who knew him well. He still smiled and laughed in public, but the moments behind closed doors told a different story, a story of a man slowly losing the freedom to make his own choices, and of a woman who, in her determination to control, had begun creating a world where reality could be shaped entirely by her will. The neighbors, friends, and even casual acquaintances had no idea that beneath the smiling exterior, a storm was quietly building. Emily's devotion, while outwardly charming, was part of a pattern that would eventually lead to consequences no one could foresee. The foundation of their life together, built on appearances of love and care, was hiding a much darker tension, a tension that would soon erupt in ways that shocked everyone who thought they truly knew them. The evening started like any other, gray clouds pressing down over the quiet streets and a soft rain tapping against the windows of Emily and Alex's small apartment. Inside, the air was heavy with a stillness that went unnoticed at first. Alex had been feeling unwell for several days, complaining of fatigue and dizziness, but Emily had brushed off his symptoms as minor, insisting he needed rest and proper care at home rather than a hospital visit. That night, as he sat on the couch, his body suddenly gave way, collapsing in a heap that sent a muffled thud across the room. At first, Emily froze, her mind racing, but the reaction that followed was unsettling in its calmness. She leaned over him, checking his pulse and his breathing with careful attention, yet the words she repeated in a soft, almost soothing tone were chilling. "He's just asleep. He'll wake up soon." When paramedics arrived, they were met with the unusual scene of a woman insisting that her unresponsive boyfriend was merely resting. Emily guided them through the apartment, pointing out how he had been feeling tired and needed sleep, framing his collapse as nothing more than an extreme case of exhaustion. The paramedics, trained to detect urgency, found his condition alarming: his skin pale, his breathing shallow, and his pulse weak. They attempted to stabilize him, but Emily's interference was subtle yet persistent. She shifted his position, moved his arms, and occasionally hesitated when they tried to administer treatments, all the while insisting he didn't need anything more than rest. Her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the critical situation unfolding, leaving the responders unsettled and frustrated. Over the next few hours, Alex's condition grew steadily worse. He remained motionless on the couch, eyes half closed, lips dry, yet Emily never once panicked. Instead, she stayed at his side, adjusting blankets, speaking to him softly, and occasionally pressing a cold cloth to his forehead. Her behavior bordered on ritualistic, a meticulous care that disguised something deeper and far more troubling. She documented the time he had fallen asleep, monitored his breathing, and made notes about his skin color and temperature, convinced that her observations would somehow prove he was recovering. Neighbors, drawn by the occasional flicker of light in the apartment or the muted sounds of movement, began to notice the strange routine, whispering among themselves about the oddness of the night. Friends who tried to call or visit found themselves met with evasive explanations and a persistent narrative. Alex was simply sleeping, resting from exhaustion, nothing more. Emily's insistence was unnerving, a mix of authority and desperation that made it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge her version of reality. She refused to transport him to the hospital or even allow routine medical interventions, framing each attempt as unnecessary or intrusive. The tension in the apartment was palpable, a quiet battle between life and denial where every breath Alex took seemed to hang in balance, unnoticed by the outside world. By the time night fully descended, the gravity of the situation had escalated beyond control. Alex was barely conscious, yet Emily continued her vigil as if nothing were wrong. Paramedics returned once more, this time with additional staff, but Emily remained resolute, her unwavering conviction making it difficult for anyone to intervene effectively. Her belief, or perhaps her denial, created a strange and chilling barrier between reality and her perception of it, leaving Alex's fragile body caught in a liminal state. What began as a minor health scare had transformed into a tense standoff, a moment where the line between care and obsession became dangerously thin, setting the stage for a tragedy that would shock everyone who thought they understood the people inside that quiet apartment. Days passed, and the atmosphere inside the apartment grew heavier, thick with the weight of uncertainty and quiet desperation. Alex remained mostly motionless on the couch, his eyes half-lidded and his movements sluggish, yet Emily persisted in insisting that he was simply asleep, recovering in his own time. She had developed an almost ritualistic routine around him, checking his breathing at precise intervals, adjusting pillows and blankets with meticulous care, and documenting every minor change in his skin tone or pulse. Her journal was filled with observations that she believed proved his gradual improvement, though to any outside observer, it read more like the meticulous notes of someone in denial, desperately holding on to hope that reality could be rewritten. The apartment itself began to feel claustrophobic, a place suspended in a strange, timeless bubble. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic wipes, herbal teas Emily brewed obsessively, and the faint metallic tang of medicine left untouched. Neighbors started noticing unusual patterns, lights flicking on late at night, the faint rustle of movement when the rest of the building was quiet, and occasional soft murmurs from Emily as she spoke to Alex. The sounds were not alarming in volume, but their repetition and intensity created a subtle unease among those who lived nearby. They exchanged glances, whispered theories, and wondered if someone should intervene, yet Emily's calm authority made it difficult for anyone to act decisively. Friends who had once visited regularly began to drift away, confused and unsettled by the increasingly strange situation. Calls went unanswered or were met with Emily's insistence that Alex simply needed more rest, that there was nothing to worry about. She refused medical advice, framing hospital visits as unnecessary and even harmful, claiming that doctors would not understand Alex's unique condition and that he needed her personal attention. Her meticulous care had taken on a controlling edge, dictating not only what Alex could do but who could see him, creating a bubble of isolation around him. Even minor attempts by friends to question her were met with a quiet, unshakable conviction that she alone knew what was best. The tension inside the apartment began to affect the physical space itself. Food sat untouched for hours, sometimes days, while Emily meticulously prepared special diets, convinced that proper nutrition would accelerate Alex's recovery. Pillows were arranged just so, blankets folded precisely, and small rituals were performed at consistent times, each intended to coax him back to full health. The apartment became a strange hybrid of a sanctuary and a prison, a place where care and control blurred so completely that it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. As the days wore on, subtle signs of deterioration became undeniable, though Emily either ignored them or reframed them as minor setbacks. His skin grew paler, his breathing shallower, yet she continued to reassure herself and anyone who asked that he was merely sleeping. Experts who later reviewed the case would describe her behavior as obsessive, a form of denial that had escalated into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. In her mind, she was protecting him, keeping him safe from harm, but in reality, she was trapping him in a state of suspended vulnerability. The world outside seemed to inch closer, drawn by glimpses of strange activity, rumors, and whispers. Neighbors grew uneasy, sensing that something was amiss, but Emily's unyielding demeanor created an invisible barrier. She had transformed concern into doubt, making anyone who questioned her feel uncertain and hesitant. Inside, time seemed to stretch endlessly, each day a repetition of careful observation and meticulous care, yet the subtle creep of danger lurked beneath the surface, setting the stage for a confrontation that no one could ignore for much longer. By the time authorities became involved, the situation had escalated far beyond the initial collapse. A concerned neighbor, noticing the odd patterns of lights, movement, and Emily's insistence that Alex was simply sleeping, had called emergency services. When the investigators arrived, they were confronted with a scene that defied immediate understanding. Alex lay on the couch, fragile and unresponsive, his body pale and weak, surrounded by neatly arranged blankets, pillows, and a tangle of notes and charts meticulously documenting his sleep patterns. Emily greeted them calmly, her voice steady, repeating that he was merely asleep and needed quiet rest. The juxtaposition of her composure against the critical state of Alex's condition was unnerving, leaving the investigators unsure how to proceed. Medical personnel quickly assessed the situation and determined that Alex's condition was severe, the result of days of neglect and untreated illness. His body had begun to shut down under the strain of exhaustion, dehydration, and lack of proper care. Emily, however, remained unyielding. She guided the paramedics through the apartment, explaining her observations with a conviction that was chilling in its precision. Each time they attempted to move him or administer treatments, she hesitated, offering reasons why he should remain in place, why the procedures might disrupt his recovery. Her demeanor blurred the lines between helpfulness and obstruction, creating a tense standoff between reality and her version of it. As the investigation unfolded, officers noted the eerie atmosphere that had developed inside the apartment. Medication bottles were scattered but mostly untouched, meals sat prepared but uneaten, and a series of charts and journals documented every minor movement and breath Alex had taken in recent days. The level of detail in Emily's record suggested an obsession with control rather than care. It was as if she believed her documentation alone could maintain his life or persuade the world that he was improving, that he would awaken if she simply adhered to the strict regimen she had devised. The scene struck investigators as both methodical and unsettling, revealing a mind caught between denial and compulsion. Friends and neighbors were interviewed, painting a portrait of Emily as someone who had always been attentive but whose concern had grown into something more extreme. They described the way she had slowly isolated Alex, dictating who could visit and even controlling the smallest aspects of his daily routine. This pattern of dominance, initially masked as care, had escalated into a dangerous form of negligence, leaving Alex vulnerable despite her constant presence. The investigators began to understand how her insistence that he was merely asleep had delayed critical medical intervention, turning a treatable situation into a life-threatening one. As medical staff finally stabilized Alex enough to transport him, the complexity of Emily's mindset became clearer. Experts later suggested that her behavior straddled the line between denial and delusion, a mix of obsessive love, fear, and the inability to accept reality. She had created an environment in which she controlled every variable, convinced that her careful observation and intervention were sufficient to sustain life. The investigation revealed a grim truth. Alex's decline was not the result of a sudden accident, but a slow, tragic consequence of prolonged neglect fueled by Emily's unrelenting belief that he was simply asleep. The case stunned everyone involved, highlighting the dangerous extremes to which denial and obsession can drive a person, leaving a vulnerable life suspended in the delicate balance between care and harm. Alex's condition worsened despite the efforts of medical staff, and the reality that Emily had refused intervention for days became painfully clear. He passed away quietly in the hospital, his fragile body finally succumbing to the prolonged neglect that had taken hold in the apartment. The news shocked friends, neighbors, and the broader community who had once seen Emily as a devoted and caring partner. In the aftermath, a wave of questions arose. How could someone so outwardly attentive allow a person she claimed to love to deteriorate so severely? How could denial escalate to such a dangerous degree? As the investigation continued, more details about Emily's past began to surface, painting a picture that contrasted sharply with the image she had presented to the world. Records revealed a history of obsessive tendencies and controlling behavior in her previous relationships. Friends described patterns of extreme attentiveness that often crossed boundaries, showing a desire to dictate the lives of those around her under the guise of care. Those who had tried to confront her or intervene were often met with unwavering conviction and subtle manipulation, making it difficult for anyone to challenge her authority. Emily's devotion, while outwardly charming, had always contained a darker edge, one that only became visible when circumstances demanded a confrontation with reality. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation came from her personal journals and research materials discovered in the apartment. Emily had been reading extensively about life preservation, techniques to maintain consciousness, and ways to prevent death, convinced she could somehow wake Alex up or prolong his existence. The meticulous notes, diagrams, and strategies revealed a mind consumed with the impossible task of controlling life itself. Her actions were not simply denial, they were a complex mix of obsession, desperation, and a refusal to accept the limits of human mortality. It became evident that Emily's insistence that Alex was just asleep was more than a simple defense mechanism. It was a carefully constructed reality in which she believed she could hold him suspended between life and death. During the trial, experts testified about the psychological aspects of Emily's behavior, explaining how her obsessive tendencies and extreme denial had combined to create a tragic situation. Testimonies described a person whose perception of care had become inseparable from control and whose inability to accept the reality of Alex's condition had ultimately contributed to his demise. The jury was presented with a portrait of a woman both methodical and delusional, whose love had twisted into a form of dangerous obsession. The courtroom was left grappling with the complex intersection of affection, denial, and negligence, trying to reconcile Emily's outward charm with the devastating consequences of her actions. The community struggled to process the events, torn between disbelief and horror. Neighbors and friends who had once admired Emily found themselves questioning how someone could maintain such a composed exterior while allowing a life to slip away. The story of Emily and Alex became a cautionary tale about the fragility of human perception and the dangers of unchecked obsession. It revealed how the line between love and control can blur, with devastating consequences when one person's belief in their own ability to protect becomes a barrier to reality. Emily's actions left a lasting imprint on those who knew her and on a community forced to confront the chilling reality that appearances can hide the most tragic truths.